Okay, so you want to understand the challenges small developers face rehabbing vacant homes in Baltimore.
We're diving deep today.
We've got a report from the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative
Interviews with developers.
and even some insights from community leaders.
Get ready for tight margins.
Surprising funding sources.
And the constant struggle to make those numbers work.
It's going to be a wild ride.
What's so interesting is how this goes beyond just picturing those vacant row houses.
Right.
It's about understanding the financial realities for these developers.
It's like solving a puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit,
A perfect analogy.
and you're constantly searching for those missing bits.
And one of the most elusive pieces is the funding.
The show me the money part of the equation?
Yeah.
This report really highlights the length developers go to, especially when a promising property pops up.
It's a race against time. They need to secure that property quickly. And that often means turning to hard money lenders.
Hard money lender.
Think of it like a short-term, high-stakes loan.
Risky business.
They provide fast cash, which is crucial in a competitive market, but at a steep price. We're talking interest rates that can climb to 12 or even 14% plus fees.
So that initial loan just got a whole lot more expensive.
Exactly.
So speed comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Makes sense. What about more traditional avenues like banks or those community development financial institutions, the CDFIs?
They have a role for sure, especially CDFIs, which are often mission-aligned with community development.
Right.
However, their processes, while thorough, can't match the speed of a hard money lender. And banks, they can be hesitant with vacant properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. It's a risk calculation for them.
So developers are caught between this rock and a hard place. Do they go for the fast cash and risk those high interest rates, or do they navigate a slower, more traditional route and risk losing out on the property altogether?
And that's where we see the ingenuity of these small developers shine through.
Love it when that happens.
The report highlighted a fascinating case. One developer partnered with an investor group from California. They were drawn to the potential of Baltimore's market. They saw an opportunity to rehab these vacant homes and turn a profit, and that outside investment provided the developer with the capital they needed.
Talk about thinking outside the box. And it sounds like this wasn't an isolated case.
Not at all. Another developer featured in the report used the equity they'd built from a previous successful project to finance their next one. It's like this delicate juggling act, piecing together funds from different sources, each one with its own set of strings attached.
It's a constant hustle. But securing that initial funding, it sounds like that's just the tip of the iceberg. This
Yeah.
gap financing issue, that's where things get really interesting.
You hit the nail on the head. Imagine this. A developer purchases a vacant home. They secure the funds for the renovation itself. But even after a complete overhaul, the cost of the project often exceeds the market value of the property.
Okay.
There's a gap between what they've invested and what they can realistically sell it for.
That makes sense. But where do they find that extra money to bridge that gap? It's not like they can just magic it out of thin air.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? The report actually mentions that the city used to offer subsidies specifically for these types of renovations. These funds came from federal programs, but sadly, those have largely dried up.
Oh, no.
It's a real blow to developers.
So it's like the city is offering this lifeline with one hand and then pulling it away with the other.
Yeah, it's tough.
No wonder developers feel like they're walking a tightrope.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
So where are they supposed to turn for this elusive gap financing?
Well, the report highlights a few lifelines. State programs like the Baltimore Regional Neighborhoods Initiative, or BRNI,
Okay.
and Community Legacy offer some funding, but these are often limited and highly competitive.
So it's a real scramble to secure those funds. And I imagine even if they do manage to snag some of that funding, those razor-thin margins don't leave much room for error.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The report gave a range of profit margins, from a nail-biting 8 or 9%, all the way up to 20% or more.
Okay.
Location plays a huge role, of course.
Mhm.
Developers working in more stable communities naturally see healthier margins. But then there's the cost of labor, which can eat into those profits faster than you'd think.
Speaking of things that can eat into profits, let's talk about the HGTV effect.
Oh, yeah.
The report actually mentions this.
It's a very real phenomenon. Buyer expectations have skyrocketed thanks to those home improvement shows. People see these stunning kitchens with top-of-the-line appliances
Right.
and spa-like bathrooms, and suddenly, a perfectly functional renovated bathroom just doesn't cut it anymore.
So it's not just about making these homes livable, it's about creating these Instagram-worthy spaces.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for developers, that means investing in those higher-end finishes and amenities, which of course adds to the overall cost.
Right.
It's this constant pressure to elevate, to meet those heightened expectations, all while trying to keep the project within a reasonable budget.
And then there's the whole question of whether to renovate for sale or renovate for rental. It sounds like that decision comes with its own set of considerations.
It does. Some developers see building a rental portfolio as a way to generate a more consistent income stream. It provides a level of predictability that selling individual homes might not offer.
Right.
However, some community leaders worry about the long-term implications of this model.
What are some of their concerns?
They're concerned that a high concentration of rentals in a neighborhood might hinder people from putting down roots. They worry about a transient population and the impact that might have on things like school enrollment, community involvement, and that sense of ownership that comes with homeownership.
It's a valid concern. If people don't feel rooted in a community, it can be challenging to build those social connections and that sense of belonging that makes a neighborhood thrive. So how do developers navigate that tension between creating financially viable projects and addressing these broader community concerns?
It's a delicate balance, and there's no easy answer. The report suggests that open dialogue and collaboration between developers, community members, and city officials are essential.
Communication is key.
Perhaps through these conversations, they can explore models that prioritize both individual financial goals and the long-term well-being of the community as a whole.
It's like finding that sweet spot where everyone benefits, where revitalization efforts uplift both individual lives and the entire neighborhood.
Absolutely. But navigating those community dynamics is just one piece of the puzzle. The report also delves into the bureaucratic maze that developers face. And let me tell you, it's enough to make your head spin.
It's the dreaded red tape that we hear so much about.
Exactly. And one of the prime examples is the process of obtaining historic renovation tax credits.
Oh, yeah.
On the surface, it's a fantastic program offering tax breaks to homeowners who purchase renovated historic properties.
So a win-win for homeowners and developers, right?
In theory, yes. But for developers navigating the application process, which goes through the Commission on Historic and Architectural Preservation, or CHEP, as it's known,
GEP?
can be incredibly time-consuming and complex.
What kind of hoops are we talking about here?
The report mentions developers facing waits of 4 to 6 weeks,
Wow.
sometimes even longer, just for the initial review process,
Oh my God.
and then again for final approval.
And that's if everything goes smoothly.
And I'm guessing it doesn't always go smoothly,
Not always.
right? Developers have expressed frustration with CHEP's requirements, particularly when it comes to preserving certain historical elements. While preserving the historical character of these homes is undeniably important.
Of course.
Some of the requirements, like maintaining outdated interior layouts or staircases that might not be the most functional, can be challenging.
It's that clash between historical integrity and modern living. I imagine striking that balance isn't always easy.
Not at all.
Hmm.
And on top of the waiting game and the sometimes subjective nature of those requirements, the report also points to inconsistencies in how CHEP applies those rules.
Oh, really?
This lack of clarity can create uncertainty for developers who are trying to plan and budget effectively.
It's hard to hit a moving target.
It is. And when time equals money, those delays and inconsistencies can really throw a wrench in the whole process. It's no wonder some developers feel like they're stuck in quicksand.
That sounds awful. And if those CHEP hurdles were enough, the report also delves into the bureaucratic labyrinth of permits and approvals,
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
which are enough to make even the most seasoned developer throw their hands up in exasperation.
Absolutely.
Can you give me an example?
The report specifically mentions issues with BGE, our local utility company. Larger renovation projects often require BGE reviews and approvals, which can take months.
Months.
Imagine you're a small developer operating on a shoestring budget. You've got contractors on standby materials ordered, and then bam, you're hit with an unexpected delay because of a utility approval.
It's like hitting a brick wall when you're already racing against the clock.
Exactly. And those delays have real-world consequences. They can throw off construction schedules, increase labor costs, and in some cases even jeopardize the entire project.
So frustrating. It's a high-stakes waiting game. And speaking of hitting a moving target, let's not forget about the world of buyer incentives.
Oh, right.
Because on the one hand, having incentives for buyers seems like a good thing,
Sure.
but the report suggests it's not always smooth sailing.
Not exactly. Baltimore offers a bunch of buyer incentive programs,
Yeah.
things like the Vacants to Value Booster Grant,
Okay.
the Live Baltimore Trolley Tour Grant,
Cute.
and those Live Near Your Work program grants. On paper, they sound fantastic.
So what's the catch?
Well, these programs are often incredibly specific. They might be limited to certain neighborhoods have very strict eligibility requirements or have limited funding that runs out quickly.
So it's not something a developer can always bank on.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a developer trying to piece together a budget and you're hoping to factor in a certain incentive program, right? But that program's funding might dry up or the eligibility requirements might change, and suddenly you're left scrambling to make up the difference.
Ugh. It adds this extra layer of complexity and uncertainty to an already complex process.
Exactly. The report also points out that these programs are incredibly fragmented. You've got separate applications, deadlines, and requirements for each one.
Oh, good Lord.
It creates an administrative nightmare for developers who are already juggling multiple projects and deadlines.
Okay, so we've talked about this historic renovation tax credit, which benefits the homeowner.
Right.
But the report also mentions this other tax credit, the Maryland Sustainable Communities Tax Credit, or SCTC. What's the deal with that one?
This one's interesting because it highlights the disconnect that can sometimes exist between well-intentioned policies and their real-world implementation.
Mm,
So the SCTC is a state income tax credit that's equal to 20% of the cost of renovations.
okay.
But it's only applicable to renovations that meet specific historical standards.
Well, that's great. Yeah. It sounds like a great way to encourage those historically sensitive renovations. What's the problem?
The problem is that the credit isn't directly accessible to developers. It's given to the homeowner after they purchase the property.
So the developer who actually incurs the cost of those renovations doesn't see a dime of that tax credit.
You got it.
Yeah.
It creates this odd dynamic where the developer is essentially making a significant investment based on the hope that the eventual homeowner will qualify for and utilize the credit.
So not exactly the most reliable incentive for a developer who's already facing razor-thin margins.
Right.
Have any developers found creative ways to work around this?
Some have tried.
Mm,
The report mentions developers who started writing clauses into their sales contracts where the buyer agrees to remit a portion of that tax credit back to the developer.
interesting.
But it's not an ideal solution. It relies on the buyer's good faith, and it's not legally binding in the same way that a direct incentive would be.
It sounds like this SCTC situation is a perfect example of how even well-intentioned policies can have these unintended consequences that create headaches for developers.
Precisely. And it highlights the need for ongoing dialogue and collaboration between policymakers and developers to ensure that these incentives are actually achieving their intended goals without creating unnecessary obstacles.
It's about finding those win-win solutions that benefit everyone involved.
Exactly. But let's be real. Even with the most creative financing, seamless bureaucracy, and perfect incentives, there's another layer of complexity that these developers are up against. The reality of working in neighborhoods grappling with crime and neglect.
This is where those broader societal issues intersect with the very tangible challenges of rehabbing vacant homes.
Precisely. It's one thing to renovate a beautiful home, but if that home is situated on a block plagued by crime vandalism and lack of basic city services, it's going to be tough to attract buyers no matter how beautiful the interior.
It's heartbreaking because these developers are pouring their hearts and souls, not to mention their own money, into these projects, only to come up against these systemic issues that are often beyond their control.
Absolutely. The report shares some disheartening stories from developers who face these challenges head-on. They talk about instances of theft from their work sites, vandalism to newly renovated properties, and this pervasive sense of feeling unsafe, particularly after dark.
And I imagine those feelings of being unsafe extend beyond the developers themselves. Potential buyers, future residents, they need to feel safe in these neighborhoods as well.
Absolutely. It's about creating a sense of community of shared responsibility for the well-being of the neighborhood. And that's something that goes beyond just rehabbing individual homes. It requires a more holistic approach.
So it's not enough to just focus on the bricks and mortar. You also have to address those underlying issues that are impacting the fabric of the community. It's about more than just creating beautiful homes. It's about creating a thriving community where people feel safe, connected, and supported.
It's exactly. One community leader interviewed in the report argued that simply moving voucher holders around the city as they seek out newer, nicer rentals doesn't address the underlying issues of poverty and lack of opportunity.
Right.
It's a Band-Aid solution to a much deeper problem.
And this brings us back to the need for that holistic approach that you mentioned earlier. What does that look like in practice?
It means recognizing that revitalizing Baltimore's neighborhoods requires more than just rehabbing houses. It requires investments in things like job training programs, affordable childcare options, and access to quality education. It's about empowering residents to not only afford to live in these revitalized neighborhoods, but to thrive in them.
It's about creating a virtuous cycle where as neighborhoods improve, so do the opportunities for the people who live there.
Right.
But even when those renovated homes are ready,
Right.
finding qualified buyers can be a challenge in itself.
You've hit on a critical bottleneck in this whole revitalization process.
Hmm.
The report really emphasizes that shortage of credit-worthy buyers. It's a major hurdle for these developers.
So imagine this. You're a developer, you've jumped through all these hoops, secured the funding, navigated the bureaucracy, you finally finished this beautiful renovation,
Right.
and then you hit this final hurdle.
Exactly. And it has far-reaching implications. These developers are taking on significant financial risk. They're often operating on those razor-thin margins we discussed, and they need buyers
Yep.
who can actually qualify for a mortgage to make these projects viable.
It makes sense, but it's still a huge obstacle. And for many potential buyers, especially in communities that have historically faced disinvestment and economic challenges, credit history can be a real barrier. It's like this catch-22 situation.
Precisely. And that's where the report highlights the need for more robust credit counseling and repair services. It's not enough to simply educate potential buyers about the importance of good credit.
Right.
We need to provide them with the tools and resources to actually improve their credit scores.
So it's about empowering residents to not only dream of homeownership, but to take concrete steps towards achieving that dream. It's about breaking down those systemic barriers that have prevented so many from accessing the traditional housing market.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And this is where the report's conclusion takes on a more hopeful tone.
Mm.
It highlights organizations like Harbor Bank Community Development Corporation
Yeah.
and Ernst Valerie Investments that are actively working to cultivate the next generation of developers.
That's amazing. Tell me more about what they're doing.
They're providing training resources, hands-on experience to aspiring developers, many of whom come from the very neighborhoods they're working to revitalize.
It's like they're planting seeds for a more sustainable future where the communities themselves are driving the revitalization process.
It's an inspiring model. They recognize that simply parachuting developers into these communities isn't a long-term solution.
Right.
They're focused on building capacity from within, on fostering a sense of ownership and empowerment that extends beyond just bricks and mortar.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be reflecting on as they think about the challenges facing small developers in Baltimore?
Well, firstly, it's essential to understand that there's no magic bullet. Revitalizing Baltimore's neighborhoods will require a multifaceted approach that involves developers, policymakers, community organizations, and residents all working in tandem.
It's about recognizing those interconnected challenges, from the intricacies of financing to the importance of addressing those broader systemic issues that impact the well-being of the entire community.
Exactly. We need to find innovative ways to bridge that gap in financing, whether it's through creative partnerships, expanded access to state and federal funds, or even exploring new models of community-driven investment.
And it sounds like streamlining those bureaucratic processes, especially when it comes to things like historic preservation and permit approvals, is crucial to keeping those projects moving and those costs under control.
Absolutely. Time is money, especially for these small developers. And those delays can make or break a project.
Right.
But beyond those practical considerations, it's about fostering a sense of shared responsibility for the well-being of these communities. It's about ensuring that the benefits of revitalization reach all residents.
It's about creating a more equitable and sustainable future for Baltimore. And it sounds like that starts with understanding the complexities these small developers face and recognizing that they're not just rehabbing houses, they're rebuilding communities.
Beautifully said. It's about fostering a city where everyone has the opportunity to not just live, but to thrive in safe, healthy, and vibrant neighborhoods.
It certainly is. And on that note, as you reflect on the complexities of this issue, we leave you with this thought. How can you contribute to a more equitable and sustainable future for Baltimore? The answer might surprise you.